Hey there, cool cats and kittens. Today I finally got my parts to do a CPU delidding. Intel is notoriously known for using pretty, I don't know if it's cheap, but it's poor performing thermal compound. So the stuff that transfers the heat from that die to the lid. So a lot of people online have found that if they can improve their thermals, meaning they can get lower temperatures so that they can crank the settings higher on their CPU so they can go faster. They can improve those thermals by swapping out that thermal compound with something better like liquid metal. So finally I got my liquid metal, and I figured it'd be kind of fun to do this process. I'm gonna stop it here and show you some clips of like me actually doing it. This is before I actually do this process, so hopefully I don't ruin the CPU and ruin my computer. So let's see if it works. Alright, so I removed the CPU from my computer. I didn't record that part because I mean there's hundreds of videos on how to do that. But here is the CPU. I'm working with an Intel i7 8700K. So this part is what we're going to be doing the surgery on, if you will. So the process, what it looks like is me putting the CPU into this thing, popping open the lid, and then using this included stick to remove the adhesive that's going to be left over. And once I do that, I apply the thermal compound and put the new lid on, and then we're going to put it back onto the computer. So let's start it off. Until I can't go anymore. And now's the really scary part. Alright, so I'm going to hold it, and eventually it's going to do a pop. Oh man, this is so sketchy. Okay, that's hopefully it. I wish I would have caught your face when I did that. So we delidded the CPU now. That part, I'm not gonna lie, doesn't feel, I guess, safe, the right word? I don't know, it's a little concerning. We were both kind of tense when I was doing that part. So the next part, I'm actually gonna go through, I'm gonna clean all this up. Oh, this is the thermal paste that was on there. And I'm also going to scrape off, this is the silicone adhesive, this is what was holding it in place. So this tool that they gave us, I think it's like a little bamboo stick or something. It's kind of a more delicate tool to try and start doing this. But I'll scrape it and come back when it's clean. Alright, so here you can see I think this is as much as I'm gonna remove. Hey, this is Carlos in editing. I realized after recording this that I really should have recorded the process of scraping the glue off, because when I was looking on how to do this process I could never find that. So I don't know why I didn't record that, but sorry about that. But at least I do explain the process that I did. So, all right. You can see that it's not perfect. So around the edge it's still, you know, there. You're not going for perfect. You just, the reason you want to remove that is because you want, when you put the IHS back, or the new one on there, you want that to do direct contact with the die. So that silicone actually raises the die by a little bit. So you want to pretty much remove that completely, or as much as you can. So that process took me about 5 minutes using this little thing. And if you want to see kind of at least the technique that I used, we'll see if I damaged this thing, but hopefully not. I was pretty much going through, being very careful not to hit these things. I read online, a lot of people break those. So you want to be very careful not to just scrape them off. But pretty much I went like this or circular motions to start just scraping that off. And like I said, that took about 5 minutes. So now, I'm not sure if you're supposed to be blowing on it, but hey, here we are. So now the next step we're going to do is we are going to clean as much off. This comes with these isopropyl alcohol swabs. So we're gonna just clean the debris off of it. Then what we're gonna do, we're gonna tape off the outside area so that only the die is exposed, because once we start dealing with the liquid metal, this is conductive. So you only want it on the die. So that's why we're going to tape off all the areas, and we're going to take one final precaution after we remove the tape that is kind of unusual, so look forward to that. But now let's put on the tape. I'm just going to use regular masking tape. You don't want anything too strong because this is just to cover the area. I'm sure electrician's tape would work. You just want to cover the area. So you want to see this part here. So see, just the die is exposed. Now we want to clean it. I already cleaned it a little bit, but you want to make sure there's no debris on there. The silicone stuff that you were scraping off, it does kind of go everywhere. But this surface has to be pristine. So after the alcohol swab, I think this came with the liquid metal. We're gonna use this polishing swab. Whoa! Okay, pause there. Alright, first blooper. I thought this was going to be a little polishing swab. It's actually material for for buffing it. And I stuck my finger in there, and that was pretty surprising. So, instead, we're gonna, I don't know if we can squeeze this out. Yeah, we can squeeze it out. It says to use either a paper towel. Now I'm kind of concerned about scratching the surface. It's probably better to use a microfiber. Alright.
You want me to grab that?
Pause. Alright, so we're gonna use a microfiber. Whoa, that is probably way too much. But
oh, that's a lot bigger.
That seems like a lot. We'll find out. Never worked with this stuff before. I've used thermal compound, the stuff that you put on the top of the IHS, but never this stuff. So I'm gonna screw this thing on. This looks right. Alright, just as a test, I want to see how much comes out. A strategy I saw, Gamers Nexus. Whoa! See, it does come out like crazy. That's exactly what I had read. But look at this stuff. This stuff is kind of interesting. We call it liquid metal, and this is way too much right here. I'm glad I figured this out. You know, I'm figuring this out now. But this is super conductive. Probably not super conductive. That means actually something. But it is very conductive, and we only want it on the die. So I'm gonna do a few practice runs, because from what I saw, there was some a technique where I think you shake it. There it is. Yeah. So I'm shaking it until a little dot comes out. I don't know if you can see that on the camera. You can. And apparently it's just a little bit like that, what you need. Just a little bit. And then that's gonna be spread out across the die. I hope that's, I mean, it looks like nothing really. It looks like even smaller, much smaller than a grain of rice. So we're gonna try that. All right, this is the second scariest part in my opinion. Actually, and scraping was a little concerning, but let's see if, oh my god, man, this really wants to come out. Okay, let's see. There it is. This looks good. In fact, I think that might be too much. I'm actually gonna try and scoop up back a little bit. Oof. I took most of it out. Let's see if that's enough. It comes with these little swabs. So from what I could read in forums, what you want to avoid is that when you move it, that it kind of moves like water. So if you can move it and it moves like water, that probably means you have too much.
Be water, my friend.
Really, you just want this to cover every little bit of the die and nothing more.
How do you feel you did?
We'll see. I think this is good. This is pretty thin. And from every video I watched, the camera never really, I don't know, it's hard to judge with the camera. As opposed to like regular thermal paste on an IHS, you can, on thermal paste, you can just see kind of how big the bead was. Because a lot of people, you put one bead and then kind of smush the heat sink. But with this, you don't want to do that. You need to cover every corner. I think this looks good, actually, from what I can tell. We're gonna find out. And if I move it, it's not doing the water thing. I don't know. It's so reflective that it's probably difficult to tell. But I'm not seeing any like liquidy behavior. Oh, and by the way, the reason why you don't want liquidy behavior is because if there's too much, when you put the IHS on it, it's gonna spread out. And like I said, it's conductive. So if it falls on the other pieces, you can just short your CPU and you're out of CPU. All right. The next piece we're gonna do is you have to do the same treatment on the die, on the inside of the die. Probably more than we need, but we'll suck up some back up if we see too much. What we're going to do now is we're going to remove the tape and we're gonna put nail polish on certain parts of the CPU. And I'm not kidding, it's actually nail polish right here. We got this stuff. Sally Hansen. I bet you she never thought she was going to get into electronics. So, why nail polish? So, nail polish, certain nail polish, you want it to be clear, not the gel stuff, and there's certain chemicals that you want to make sure it doesn't have. I'll post it on this video. But the idea is that you cover parts that you don't want the liquid metal to fall on because you don't want them to short, and the nail polish will act as a barrier to the liquid metal. So it'll pretty much do, I know I said that to not get the gel stuff, but it's like it makes a little kind of coating. I mean, think of a nail, right? I mean, you're covering up it with something. It's like shielding the nail to protect it. Well, you're basically going to do the same thing with the parts that you don't want the liquid metal to touch. So let's do that part right now. All right, so we got the liquid metal on both parts, the IHS and the processor. So normally what I'm about to do is kind of controversial, at least from what I can tell in the forums. The reason we needed that tool to get rid of the IHS or remove it was because they use I think it's a silicone glue between both parts. But from what I can tell, Gamers Nexus, oh my gosh, the cat just jumped right over the processor. Well, hopefully that doesn't ruin it. Some people say, or at least Gamers Nexus, which is kind of my source for this kind of stuff, I highly recommend that YouTube channel. They do extensive testing on this kind of stuff. They found that they actually get better thermals by not reapplying the glue. And their theory for that is that, like I said earlier, that silicone, that stuff it takes space, a little bit of space between the IHS and the die. So what you want is the least amount of space. You want full contact. So by not putting any glue, you can get better thermals. So that makes putting this on a little bit tricky. Dropping it like it's hot. Ooh. Alright. Didn't drop it well. Alright. So I'm gonna put the IHS on now, and then the motherboard CPU holder should just hold it in place. And here I want to be very careful.
You're lined up.
Should be.
Okay.
So, as you can probably guess, this is simply floating right on there, which feels pretty crazy to do, but we're gonna see. Holding it down with my one hand while I put this part down. All right, and now it's in place. So no glue, no nothing. The only thing holding it down are these parts of the clamp, and that's what people, kind of the hardcore Gamers Nexus and the forums talk about doing. So the rest of this process is pretty just a standard applying thermal paste to the top of it. Any, PC builder is used to this. So I'm gonna skip this part. All right, so I built the computer. It actually booted. And let's just see how it's actually performing now. All right, come over here. Here on NZXT Cam, which if you're hardcore, you're not going to trust that. Let's go with CPU, hardware monitor. Temperatures. Package, we have it on idle. We have 27 degrees. So before this, idle was about 32, so that's pretty negligible in idle. We don't care that much about that, but it's a minor improvement. Where we hope to see some improvements is when we run Prime 95. So if you zoom over here, Prime 95 stresses your CPU out to beyond normal levels. So your computer should never be running this intense, but it's purely for making sure that the CPU is stable when you're doing overclocks and seeing your temperatures rise to their max. So let's run it. I like to do this one, small FTTTS, maximum power, heat, and CPU stress. So let's just run it. All right, so you can see over here, CPU is at 100%, temperature 60. That is amazing. I should have actually recorded like benchmarks before I did this, but I can tell you that at this, with this stress test, it would actually go up to 95. Currently, I have the CPU overclocked at 4.8, which for this CPU, I'd say is a modest overclock. But 60 degrees, that is really, really low. That's a huge gain. I mean, 30 to 35 degrees gain, that I'm very happy with that. I guess the next step here would be to see how high I can overclock. because now I have that headroom, right? The CPU is stable, very, very stable. It's not thermal throttling, which is another issue that when you're overclocking, if your CPU gets really hot, it safeguards itself and goes, well, let me not go that hard, that fast. And so until the temperatures go down, and you want to avoid that. You're not getting the max out of your CPU. Right now it's running 100%, very cool. So that means I can see if I can go a little further. All right, so like I said, I'm gonna spend some time overclocking, but I feel like that's a whole separate subject, so I think I'm gonna end it here. So I would consider this a massive success, at least for what I was aiming. This actually, the results were better than what I was reading online, at least for me. So maybe I was lucky, maybe I must have put the right amount of the liquid metal. I'm gonna try and see if I can get maybe a 5.2 gigahertz overclock, maybe, but I'll still be happy with like 5 gigahertz and low temperatures, 70s or something like that. Would I recommend doing this to the average PC gamer? Probably not. I don't think so. I mean, I was nervous throughout the whole thing, and there were a lot of opportunities to make a mistake and short the CPU, and then I'm out of CPU, which tends to be one of the more expensive parts of the computer. So, but if you have a high-end machine and if you're in that scene, if you're already watching this computer, you're already thinking about this video. You're already thinking about this stuff. So if you take the right precautions, I guess it might be worth it to you. You know yourself and your risk tolerance, so I'll leave that up to you. Now I'm gonna clean up this mess so that my wife is happy and see if I can game a little bit. All right, bye.